with trembling hands clutching the deed and a faded photograph of her late husband. Eleanor Morgan gazed up at the weathered facade of the Westbrook Historical Museum. She had spent her last $500 buying this abandoned property at a city auction. Desperate for both a fresh start and a place to live after losing her family home to mounting medical debts. Little did she know that hidden in a forgotten storage room lay an ancient papyrus containing a map to a lost Egyptian pharaoh's tomb, a discovery that would not only change her life forever, but would thrust her into a dangerous game between determined archaeologists, corrupt antiquities dealers, and powerful collectors who had kept the secret buried for generations. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The late March rain tapped gently against the cracked windows as Eleanor followed City Administrator Thomas Wilson across the dusty marble floor of what was now her property. The once prestigious Westbrook Historical Museum had been the cultural pride of Oakridge County. Its modest galleries and 3 exhibition halls had showcased local history, traveling exhibits, and a small but respectable collection of international artifacts. Now, after sitting vacant for nearly 7 years, it stood as a hollow shell of its former self, a testament to shrinking cultural budgets and changing priorities. Her worn sneakers echoed on the marble floor, now dulled by years of abandonment. Cobwebs stretched between ornate crown moldings, and the once gleaming display cases were blanketed in a thick layer of dust. Faded informational placards peeled in corners where water damage had taken its toll, and the lingering scent of old books and preservation chemicals mingled with mustiness and decay. As I mentioned during the auction, the property is being sold as is, Thomas said, his voice bouncing off the high ceiling. Westbrook Museum closed in 2017 after the county cut all cultural funding. The city seized it for back taxes 3 years ago. Honestly, we're just happy someone's taking it off our hands. Eleanor nodded absently, her mind elsewhere. Just 6 months ago, she had been a high school history teacher living comfortably in the home she and Robert had purchased 15 years earlier. Then came his diagnosis, the aggressive cancer, the experimental treatments not covered by insurance. And finally, the devastating loss that left her not only without her beloved husband, but drowning in medical debt. The creditors had taken everything. Their modest suburban home, their savings, even the vintage record collection Robert had meticulously curated over decades. All gone in a matter of months. The location isn't terrible, Thomas continued, trying to sound encouraging. Downtown. Westbrook has seen better days, but there's talk of revitalization. The former curator's apartment above the main gallery might be habitable with some work. And the utilities? Eleanor asked, running her hand along a dusty display case that once held Civil War memorabilia. Water and electric are still connected to the grid, though you'll need to set up accounts. The plumbing might need work. Buildings this old always do, he hesitated. Look, I know you got this place for a steal, but are you sure about this? A woman alone in an abandoned museum in a struggling downtown area. Eleanor straightened her back. I've cataloged artifacts, restored historical documents, and managed an entire school department, Mr. Wilson. I've worked with my hands and my mind my whole life, and after what I've been through this past year, an old museum doesn't scare me. And this is what I can afford. What she didn't say was that her teacher's pension had been depleted by funeral costs and legal battles with the hospital. The small town of Westbrook, just 2 hours from her former suburban life, offered the only property she could afford. This forgotten museum, purchased for less than the price of a decent television. Thomas handed her a ring of brass keys. Main entrance, gallery access, storage rooms, and these smaller ones for various display cases. The basement archives are beneath the east wing. Probably best to keep that locked. Some of the old records and artifacts are still down there. Eleanor took the keys, her trained eye noticing the distinctive university markings on several of them. "Thank you, I can manage from here. Take your time looking around. I have other appointments, so I'll head out. City Hall's open weekdays if you need anything." Thomas seemed relieved to leave, the emptiness of the museum clearly making him uncomfortable. Alone in what would become both her home and her fresh start, Eleanor moved through the cavernous main gallery like a curator examining a new collection. The empty display pedestals with their protective glass cases still intact. The small office with its dusty reference book still in place. The conservation room with its specialized equipment still bolted to tables. Her experienced eyes saw past the decay to the facility's bones, solid, graceful, built to last. The ornate woodwork, the marble floors, the soaring ceilings with their elaborate moldings, all treasures waiting to be restored by someone who understood their value. She made her way to the upper level and the curator's former apartment, a surprisingly spacious 5-room residence with large windows overlooking the town square. The furniture was gone, but the fixtures remained: a clawfoot tub in the bathroom, built-in bookshelves in what had once been a study, and what appeared to have been a small laboratory for examining delicate artifacts. With cleaning and minor repairs, it could be livable within days. As she stood by the window, watching rain cascade down the ornate glass, Eleanor felt the weight of the past year pressing down on her. The devastating diagnosis that had come. Without warning, the grueling months of treatment. The heartbreaking realization that nothing would save her husband. And finally, the cold business of settling debts that had stripped away what remained of their life together. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her phone chimed with an incoming call. The screen showed Oakridge High School, her former workplace. For a moment, hope fluttered in her chest, but she quickly suppressed it. They had made their position clear when she had requested extended leave during Robert's illness. "Eleanor Morgan speaking," she answered, keeping her voice professional. "Eleanor, it's Principal Adkins." The school principal's voice was as formal as ever. "I'm just checking in. Jenkins mentioned you'd left Oakridge. Something about buying property in, where was it?" "Westbrook," Eleanor replied. "Yes, I've purchased the old historical museum here. I'm standing in it right now." "Westbrook? Isn't that where that artifact scandal happened in the 90s? What on earth possessed you to move there?" Eleanor didn't mention that her financial ruin, considered a personal failure by many of her former colleagues, had effectively ended her professional prospects at Oakridge High. Adkins himself had suggested she take time to get her affairs in order rather than embarrass the school with her financial troubles. "It's a change of pace," Eleanor said neutrally. "The property has potential. Good bones, lots of space." "Well," Adkins' voice held a note of condescension, "when you're ready to return to serious work, let me know. We could possibly find something for you in the adult education program, more suitable for someone in your circumstances." After ending the call, Eleanor let out a long breath, fighting back the anger that threatened to boil over. From respected department head and award-winning educator to relegated to teaching night classes, all because forces beyond her control had conspired against her life stability. As the afternoon light began to fade, Eleanor made her way to the East Wing. She hadn't yet explored the most intriguing feature of her new property, the basement archives. Following the main corridor to the rear of the building, she found a narrow staircase leading to the lower level. The temperature dropped noticeably as she descended. Unlike the rest of the museum, the basement showed no signs of water damage or significant deterioration. Its concrete walls and floors had been built to withstand the passage of time and the specific requirements of artifact preservation. Eleanor flipped a switch, surprised when fluorescent fixtures flickered to life overhead. The archives dominated. The space, rows of metal shelving units, flat file drawers for documents, specialized cabinets for textiles and fragile items. As a former history teacher responsible for maintaining the school's small collection of historical items, Eleanor had visited many museum storage facilities, but there was something uniquely interesting about standing in a space where actual, museum-quality artifacts had been cataloged and preserved. On the far wall, partially concealed behind a large storage cabinet, she noticed something unexpected, what appeared to be a door, its outline barely visible beneath multiple coats of paint. "Now that's interesting," she murmured, examining the hidden entrance. She pushed the heavy cabinet aside, revealing a small vault-like door with a sophisticated, electronic keypad that still showed a faint power indicator light. It appeared to be university grade, suggesting this hidden room had been part of the museum's design during its connection to the nearby university's archaeology department. But why would a small regional museum need a high-security vault? Valuable artifacts, perhaps, or something else entirely? Eleanor checked her watch. Too late to do anything more today. She needed to bring her belongings from the motel, purchase cleaning supplies, and begin making the apartment habitable. The basement archives mysteries would have to wait. That night, lying on a sleeping bag in what would become her bedroom, Eleanor scrolled through her phone, researching Westbrook Historical Museum. Most articles focused on its operational history, serving the region from 1978 until its closure in 2017. One detail caught her attention. During the 1980s and 90s, the museum had been unofficially connected to Cairo University's North American Archaeological Program, serving as a temporary repository for artifacts being studied before their return to Egypt. One paragraph mentioned an incident in 1996 that had led to the museum being temporarily closed for inventory review, though details were sparse. The museum director at that time, Professor Richard Blackwell, had apparently worked closely with Egyptian authorities during the review. His name appeared in several academic papers about a controversial excavation at a previously unknown pharaonic site near Luxor. Egyptian connections, Eleanor whispered to herself, her curiosity piqued. Could the vault in the basement be related to the Cairo University program? If the vault had remained sealed since the museum's closure, might it still contain materials from that era? Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams vivid and unsettling, standing before the vault as its doors slowly swung open, revealing shelves of ancient artifacts marked with hieroglyphics and museum catalog numbers. She woke at dawn, that dream so real she half expected to find Egyptian amulets clutched in her hands. After a simple breakfast, Eleanor drove to the local hardware store, purchasing cleaning supplies, basic tools, and an electronics repair kit. If the basement vault had a still active keypad, her experience refurbishing old-school equipment might help her bypass the lock system. The morning passed in a flurry of cleaning, sweeping decades of dust from the apartment, scrubbing fixtures, wiping windows to let in more light. By afternoon, exhausted but satisfied, Eleanor returned her attention to the basement vault. The electronic keypad offered little immediate help. The system was sophisticated and clearly designed to prevent tampering. She tried several likely combinations with no success. Think logically, she told herself, applying her problem-solving mindset. What combination might the university have used? Dates of significance? The facility's opening? Standard academic sequences? As she worked, an elderly woman appeared at the museum's front entrance, peering through the glass doors. Eleanor approached cautiously. "Can I help you?" she asked. The woman smiled warmly, her weathered face mapping decades under the Midwestern sun. "Name's Margaret Wilson. Heard someone finally bought the old Westbrook Museum. Thought I'd welcome you to the community." Eleanor introduced herself instinctively, liking the old woman's genuine manner. "I worked here, you know," Margaret said, gazing around the dusty foyer with misty eyes. 28 years as head of conservation. Started just after the university partnership was established in '82. Those were interesting days for Westbrook. The university partnership? Eleanor asked, excitement rising. The program had been mentioned in her research. Margaret nodded. With Cairo University's archaeological department. Fascinating program, officially just a cultural exchange, but they were studying some remarkable finds. Artifacts that challenged conventional Egyptian chronology. Were you here during the incident in '96? Eleanor asked. Margaret's expression darkened. Bad business, that. Inventory discrepancies of some kind. University officials everywhere for weeks. Professor Blackwell nearly lost his mind trying to contain whatever happened. This revelation sent Eleanor's mind racing. Mrs. Wilson, there's a vault in the basement archives. Would you know anything about it? Margaret's eyes widened. You found that? The secure room? She lowered her voice, though no one else was around. That was Professor Blackwell's private facility. Called it his verification room. I never knew what was inside. Only the professor and his graduate assistant had access. The vault is still locked. I have keys to the archives, but not the combination to the electronic keypad. Margaret thought for a moment. Well, for the archives, we always use the museum's founding date as the master key minus 1978. But the secure room? That would have been something academic, known only to Blackwell and his people. Eleanor's heart raced. This was exactly the kind of historical detail she needed. Would you mind if I tried some combinations while you're here? Maybe you'll remember something that helps. Together, they moved to the basement archives. Margaret visibly brightened as they entered. My goodness, this takes me back, she said, running her hand along a preservation table. Kept this place immaculate for nearly 3 decades. Artifact conservation is no place for cutting corners. Eleanor examined the keypad more carefully in Margaret's presence. It's a 6-digit sequence, most likely. Any idea what Professor Blackwell might have used? Blackwell was obsessed with Amenhotep III, Margaret recalled. The date of his tomb's discovery was like a religion to him. February 12, 1958, 021258. That discovery changed everything for scholars of that period. Eleanor carefully entered the sequence, 021258. She held her breath as the last digit was entered. A small red light continued to blink. Nothing happened. Worth a try, Margaret sighed. Blackwell must have used something else. As Margaret prepared to leave, she paused thoughtfully. You know, there was something odd after the '96 incident. Blackwell became fixated on authentication protocols, started keeping his own records separate from official channels, became convinced that someone inside the university was working against legitimate Egyptian claims. This piqued Eleanor's professional interest. What kind of records? Provenance documentation, authentication reports, excavation logs, things the university sent but weren't included in the official museum catalog. Blackwell believed the '96 discrepancy was connected to something bigger, something involving people high up in the antiquities world, but he could never prove it. After Margaret left, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about the vault and Professor Blackwell's unofficial investigation. If Blackwell had indeed kept hidden files on an inventory discrepancy that was never fully explained, those documents could be of significant historical value and potentially explosive if they implicated people who had escaped accountability. That evening, as wind rattled the museum's old windows, Eleanor researched the 1996 incident and the Westbrook Museum's connection to Cairo University. News articles described the inventory review following procedural irregularities at the museum. The university had pursued an internal investigation but had never released findings. The case had gone quiet in 1997 when Professor Blackwell was reassigned to a fieldwork position in Egypt, and the museum continued operations under new leadership until funding cuts forced its closure in 2017. One detail stood out. The lead authentication. Expert assigned to the investigation was Dr. Michael Blackwell, the professor's son. This family connection explained the museum's involvement, but also raised questions. Had the Blackwells discovered something they couldn't safely reveal? Something now locked in the basement vault? Could it be that simple? Eleanor murmured. Moving back to the vault, she tried a new combination, the date of the inventory discrepancy, which she had found mentioned in an article about the university. Investigation. The 14th of June, 1996. The mechanism remained unyielding. Frustrated but not defeated, Eleanor spent the next day settling into her new home. A local second-hand store provided basic furniture, a real bed, a table, chairs. She met several neighbors, all curious about the newcomer who had bought the old museum. "Place is probably filled with cursed artifacts," commented one elderly man at the grocery store, eyeing Eleanor with concern. "Not sure I'd want to live there alone." Returning to the museum that afternoon, Eleanor was surprised to find a sleek black car parked outside. A woman in an expensive suit stood at the entrance, checking her watch impatiently. "Ms. Morgan," she called as Eleanor approached. "Vera Reynolds, representing Heritage Acquisition Group. I understand you've recently acquired this property." Eleanor nodded cautiously, unlocking the door. "Just 4 days ago." Reynolds followed her inside without waiting for an invitation. "Our company specializes in repurposing historical properties for commercial use. We've had our eye on this museum for some time, but missed the auction notice. I'm authorized to offer you $75,000, a substantial profit on your investment." The offer was tempting, enough to rent a decent apartment for a year and provide a financial cushion while she sought work. But something felt off about Reynolds' eagerness. "I'm not interested in selling," Eleanor said firmly. "I've just moved in." Reynolds' smile tightened. "Perhaps I wasn't clear. This property requires significant renovation to be commercially viable. The cost would far exceed what a—" her eyes flicked to Eleanor's worn sneakers and second-hand jacket. "Person in your situation could manage. Our offer is quite generous." "Nevertheless, I decline." Reynolds reached into her jacket and produced a business card. "Think it over. Our offer expires in 48 hours. After that, we'll be pursuing other opportunities in Oakridge County." After she left, Eleanor examined the card. Heritage Acquisition Group had a New York address, a connection that seemed unlikely to be coincidental. Why would an East Coast developer be interested in an abandoned museum in rural Indiana? What had changed to make this property suddenly valuable? That night, unable to sleep, Eleanor returned to the basement vault. Something about Reynolds' visit had unsettled her. If the museum itself was valuable to developers, why had it sat empty for nearly 7 years? What had changed? On impulse, she tried another combination, the date the museum had closed, September 8, 2017. The keypad's light remained red. Eleanor ran her hand through her hair in frustration. She was missing something. What would an academic like Blackwell use for a truly secure facility? A memory surfaced from her time working with a university archivist on a school project. Something about significant archaeological dates. She quickly searched on her phone, King Tutankhamun tomb discovery date. With renewed hope she entered 112,222, November 22, 1922, when Howard Carter first discovered the steps to Tutankhamun's tomb. The small light turned green. Something inside the mechanism clicked. Eleanor's heart pounded as she pulled the heavy door. Slowly, the vault swung open. The smell hit her first: musty paper, old electronics, metal. Her teacher's instincts registered the odor of materials long sealed away from light and fresh air. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw shelves lining the small vault, filled with file folders, data storage devices, and what appeared to be authentication certificates. And in the center, on a small desk, sat a leather portfolio marked with faded university insignia and a simple label, Amenhotep VII Site Survey, Restricted Access. Eleanor's hands trembled as she approached it. Amenhotep VII? She'd never heard of this pharaoh. As someone who had taught ancient history for 15 years, she understood the potential significance of her discovery. If these were Professor Blackwell's unofficial files on the inventory discrepancy, they could contain information never included in the official investigation, possibly even evidence identifying a previously unknown pharaoh whose existence had been suppressed for decades. Carefully, using the precision ingrained from years of handling fragile historical documents, Eleanor opened the leather portfolio. Inside were dozens of photographs showing excavation sites, artifact collections, and what appeared to be tomb paintings depicting a pharaoh whose cartouche matched none in the established historical record. One document caught her eye, a hand-drawn map on papyrus, carbon dated to approximately 1250 BCE, showing what appeared to be a hidden tomb complex located in a previously unexplored area near the Valley of the Kings, unlike the official suspects mentioned in news accounts of a minor inventory discrepancy. This map suggested something far more significant, the potential discovery of an unknown pharaoh deliberately erased from Egyptian records. "My God," Eleanor whispered, understanding the implications. Professor Blackwell had discovered evidence of a pharaoh removed from history, perhaps explaining why the case was downplayed and never resolved. As she carefully examined the documents, a folded paper fell from between two folders. Unlike the official university documents, this appeared to be a personal letter handwritten on ordinary paper. It was dated August 15, 1997, the month before Blackwell's reassignment to Egypt. "Dear Michael," it began. "With my transfer to the field team, our verification of Amenhotep VII is officially terminated. The department has ordered all materials returned to Cairo, but I cannot in good conscience surrender the evidence we've gathered implicating Harrington Antiquities and their operatives within our research team. Dr. Jenkins died believing we were close to proving this pharaoh's existence. His accident only confirms our suspicions. As discussed, these documents must remain sealed. The evidence is compelling but circumstantial, and Harrington's influence extends to the highest levels of academia and the antiquities market. Perhaps in 30 years, when his protections have faded, the truth can emerge. Until then, I trust your discretion." "Dad," Eleanor sat back, overwhelmed by the implications. Professor Blackwell had deliberately preserved evidence of a potentially unknown pharaoh, hiding it in the museum's secure room when the official investigation was shut down, perhaps after the suspicious death of another researcher. And somehow, these files had remained sealed away, forgotten after the university partnership ended, undisturbed after the museum's closure. The question that burned in Eleanor's mind: what had happened to Harrington Antiquities and those implicated in these documents? As if in answer, she found a newspaper clipping dated 2019. Former museum director Cedric Harrington dies at 88. The obituary described him as a champion of cultural preservation who had served in academia before founding Harrington Antiquities, which he led for 3 decades before retiring to New York in 1997. More importantly, it listed his only surviving family member, granddaughter Victoria Harrington, who had returned to academia in 2018 as Deputy Director of International Acquisitions. After leading the family company for 20 years, the pieces began to fall into place. Vera Reynolds was likely connected to Victoria Harrington, representing a company suddenly interested in acquiring the museum where evidence of her grandfather's crimes might be hidden. Eleanor's protective instinct surged within her. These documents represented crucial evidence in a serious case of archaeological suppression, a potentially unknown pharaoh, deliberately hidden from history because powerful people had prioritized profit over historical truth. These files didn't belong hidden away or destroyed to protect reputations. They belonged in the hands of proper authorities who could finally address a decades-old betrayal of archaeological ethics. As she carefully returned the documents to their portfolio, Eleanor heard a sound that made her blood run cold, the main door of the museum opening. Heavy footsteps echoed through the gallery, approaching the stairs to the basement archives. Eleanor froze, her mind racing. It was nearly midnight. No legitimate visitor would arrive unannounced. Quickly, she closed the leather portfolio and looked for a place to hide it. The vault had a small floor safe embedded in one corner, likely used for the most sensitive materials when the museum was operational. She carefully placed the portfolio inside, closed it, then moved to the archive door. Through the partially open door, she could see two people descending the stairs. One was Vera Reynolds, her expensive suit now replaced with dark, practical clothing. The other was a stranger, older, academic bearing, expression grim. "I'm telling you, Director, someone's opened the vault," Reynolds was saying. "The security system registered keypad activation an hour ago." "Then where are the files?" the older woman demanded. "You assured me they'd be here undisturbed." "No one knows what they are," Reynolds insisted. "Even if this teacher found them, she wouldn't understand their significance." Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest. They knew exactly what the vault contained and had been monitoring the building, waiting for someone to solve the puzzle they couldn't. Now they wanted to ensure whatever was found remained buried forever. Making a split-second decision, Eleanor quietly closed the archive door. From inside, turning the key in the lock, the solid click echoed in the confined space. Outside, she heard Reynolds' startled exclamation. "The archives, it's locked." Footsteps rushed toward the door, followed by the handle turning vigorously. "We need the key," the director barked. "I have a master set," Reynolds replied. "But it will take time to find the right one." Eleanor assessed her situation. The archives were secure for the moment, but had only one exit. Her phone showed no signal in the basement's thick walls. However, as a practical woman who had spent her life working in old buildings, she knew that facilities of this era often had multiple access points for safety purposes. Scanning the room carefully, she noticed a small service hatch near the floor in one corner, partially hidden by a storage unit. It would likely lead to maintenance tunnels or utility conduits. She moved the unit aside, revealing a hatch just large enough for a person to crawl through. The rusted hinges protested as she pulled it open, revealing a narrow tunnel that appeared to lead toward the back of the property. Outside the archive door, she could hear Reynolds trying various keys, getting closer to finding the right one. Eleanor grabbed her phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the passage. Decades of cobwebs hung from the low ceiling, but the tunnel itself seemed structurally sound. With no other choice, she crawled inside, pulling the small hatch closed. Behind her, the passage was tight and dusty, clearly unused for many years. Eleanor moved as quickly as she could, ignoring the spider webs that clung to her hair and clothing. Behind her, she heard the archive's door open, followed by Reynolds' curse when she discovered Eleanor wasn't inside. The tunnel extended about 40 feet before ending at another small hatch. Eleanor pushed it open cautiously, emerging into an overgrown area behind the museum near an old storage shed. From this hidden position, she could see Reynolds and the woman she'd called Director exiting the main building, flashlights sweeping the property as they searched for her. Eleanor remained motionless, barely breathing as they passed within feet of her hiding place. Their voices carried clearly in the night air. "She must have found another way out," Reynolds said, frustration evident in her tone. "Find her," the older woman ordered, "and the files. If what my grandfather feared is in that vault, we can't let it resurface now. I've worked too hard rebuilding the Harrington name in academic circles. What about the acquisition project?" "The acquisition is just a cover," Director Harrington snapped. "My grandfather warned me on his deathbed that the evidence still existed somewhere in the Westbrook facility. With the university partnership terminated, I thought it was safe, but clearly we need to be more thorough." Eleanor waited until they moved toward the perimeter before slipping away in the opposite direction. With no safe way to return to her apartment and her car parked conspicuously out front, she needed another option. Margaret Wilson had mentioned living just a mile away on Maple Street. Moving through backyards and staying in shadows, Eleanor made her way to Margaret's small craftsman house. The lights were still on despite the late hour, and Margaret answered her gentle knock with surprising alertness. "My goodness, dear, what's happened to you?" she exclaimed, taking in Eleanor's disheveled appearance. "I found what was in the vault," Eleanor explained quickly. "And now the people who want to keep it hidden are after me." Margaret ushered her inside without hesitation, locking the door and drawing the curtains. "Tell me everything." As Eleanor recounted her discovery and the confrontation that followed, Margaret's expression grew increasingly grave. When Eleanor mentioned the name Harrington, the older woman's face paled. "Cedric Harrington," Margaret whispered. "Professor Blackwell suspected him all along." Syed Harrington's company had falsified provenance documents for years, especially regarding the Amenhotep artifacts. That's why the discrepancies happened. "His granddaughter is trying to get the museum now," Eleanor said. "Calling herself Reynolds," Margaret nodded grimly. "Victoria Harrington returned about a year after her grandfather died. Been buying up properties all over the county through shell corporations. Got herself appointed to a prestigious position at the Metropolitan Museum. Everyone thinks she's a preservationist continuing her family legacy." "We need to get these files to the authorities," Eleanor said. "But who can we trust? If what I read is true, the Harringtons had influence throughout academia and the antiquities world." Margaret thought for a moment. Museum Director Patel retired last year. The new director at the State Museum, Dr. Sophia Chun, came from the FBI's art crime team. No connections to the old power structures. If anyone would handle this properly, it's her. Can you call her? I left my phone in the archives when I escaped. Margaret reached for her landline, but before she could dial, headlights swept across the front window. A car was pulling into her driveway. "Were you followed?" Margaret asked sharply. "I don't think so." Eleanor moved to peek through the curtains. "It's a police cruiser." Margaret's relief was palpable. "That's my grandson, David. He's a deputy. Works the night shift." The young officer who entered moments later bore a striking resemblance to Margaret, though his expression was all business until he recognized Eleanor. "Ms. Morgan, what are you doing here?" he asked, confusion evident. "She's in trouble, David," Margaret explained. "Found some old evidence in the Westbrook vault. Evidence about Amenhotep VII. David's professional demeanor instantly intensified. The unknown Pharaoh case. That's been buried for nearly 25 years. Not buried, Eleanor. Sighed. Suppressed by Cedric Harrington and whoever else was involved. David's face hardened. Harrington's granddaughter is deputy director of international acquisitions now. Been pushing hard to digitize old museum catalogs, starting with regional collections like Westbrook. We need to speak with Dr. Chun, Eleanor said. But Victoria Harrington and someone she called director are looking for me. That would be Diana Harrington, Cedric's daughter, David clarified. Board chair at the National Antiquities Foundation now. Visits from New York once a month. He reached for his radio. I'll contact the State Museum directly. In the meantime, you're staying here where it's safe. As David stepped outside to make the call, Margaret squeezed Eleanor's shoulder. You've stirred up a hornet's nest, dear. The Harringtons have been untouchable for generations. Their antiquities business built connections with museums worldwide. No one's ever stood up to them and won. I'm not trying to win. Eleanor replied. "I just want the truth to come out." A potentially unknown pharaoh was discovered, and the people responsible for suppressing it were never held accountable. When David returned, his expression was grim. "Dr. Chun's on her way. Says to stay put and touch nothing until she arrives." He hesitated. "There's something else." Diana Harrington called in a trespassing complaint at the museum 20 minutes ago. Claimed the new owner was harboring stolen archaeological materials. 2 patrol units responded. Eleanor's blood ran cold. "They're trying to get back into the vault while making it look legitimate." David nodded. "I bet on it. But here's the thing. Sheriff Lawson is handling this personally. Wouldn't let the regular patrol secure the scene. She's been looking into cold cases since she took office last year." For the first time since discovering the vault, Eleanor felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps the truth about Amenhotep VII and the suppression of his existence would finally emerge. After decades of deliberate concealment. As they waited for Dr. Chun, Margaret prepared tea, her hands slightly trembling as she set cups on the table. "I always wondered why Professor Blackwell was so obsessed with authentication," she mused. He'd spend hours verifying and re-verifying artifact provenances, refusing to let anyone near certain pieces. So he owed it to history to be thorough. He was collecting evidence, Eleanor realized, using his position as museum director to document details the official investigation might miss or ignore. David leaned forward intently. "If what you found is legitimate evidence connecting the Harringtons to suppressing the discovery of an unknown pharaoh, it explains a lot about their continued influence, how the family maintained power for so long, why no one ever challenged them." "Fear is a powerful motivator," Margaret said quietly, "especially when academic reputations are at stake." The conversation halted at the sound of another vehicle pulling up. Through the window, they could see a state museum SUV with official markings, but no lights. A tall woman in professional attire approached the door with purposeful strides. Dr. Sophia Chun was younger than Eleanor had expected, perhaps early 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. As she entered the room, she nodded to David before turning her attention to Eleanor. "Ms. Morgan, I understand you found something significant at the Westbrook property," she said without preamble. Eleanor explained her discovery in detail: the vault, the academic files, Professor Blackwell's letter implicating Cedric Harrington and his antiquities company in the suppression of evidence about an unknown pharaoh, and the current efforts by Harrington's daughter and granddaughter to recover or destroy the evidence. Dr. Chun listened without interruption, taking occasional notes. When Eleanor finished, Chun's expression was grave but determined. "I've secured the museum," she said. "2 of my most trusted associates are guarding the archives. No one's getting into that vault without my authorization." She fixed Eleanor with a direct gaze. "But we need to move quickly. Director Diana Harrington has considerable influence. She's already called the State Department, claiming this is a matter of international cultural heritage that belongs under federal jurisdiction." "The files don't belong to the Harringtons," Eleanor said firmly. "They belong to history, to people who deserve to know the truth about a pharaoh whose existence was covered up because powerful antiquities dealers were implicated." Dr. Chun nodded. "My thoughts exactly. I need you to take me to the vault. Show me exactly what you found, where it was positioned, everything. We need to document this discovery properly before anyone can interfere." David stepped forward. "I'll escort you both. The Harringtons won't be expecting her to return so soon, especially with official museum personnel." As they prepared to leave, Margaret took Eleanor's hands in her own. "Professor Blackwell would be grateful to you," she said softly. "He died believing the truth would never come out, that the world would never know about Amenhotep VII." Eleanor squeezed the older woman's hands. The truth was just waiting for the right time, for someone who understood its value. Outside, the night had cleared. stars visible above Westbrook's quiet landscape. As Dr. Chun's vehicle moved toward the museum, Eleanor felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. In just 5 days, her life had transformed from a desperate search for affordable housing to being at the center of a decades-old archaeological cover-up. She had come to Westbrook seeking only shelter, a place to rebuild her shattered life after losing everything. Instead, she had discovered a truth long buried, one that might finally bring accountability to those who had compromised historical integrity and exposed the corrupt foundation upon which a powerful family had built their legacy. The museum loomed ahead, its abandoned facade stark against the night sky. Police vehicles surrounded the property, their lights casting alternating patterns of red and blue across the historic building. Eleanor took a deep breath, steeling herself for what came next. Some buildings held more than their apparent purpose within their walls. Some held secrets that demanded to be revealed, no matter how long they had waited in darkness. For Eleanor Morgan, the journey that had begun in grief and financial ruin had led to an unexpected purpose, becoming the voice for a truth that could no longer be silenced. As Eleanor stepped from Dr. Chun's vehicle, her eyes locked on the museum silhouette against the night sky. The property that had represented her last chance at a fresh start now stood at the center of a 25-year-old archaeological cover-up investigation. Yellow police tape cordoned off the entrance while uniformed deputies secured the perimeter, their flashlight beams cutting through darkness that seemed to hold more than just shadows. "2 of my associates are inside," Dr. Chun explained, guiding Eleanor toward the entrance. "I've told them to secure the archives, but touch nothing until we arrive." Deputy David Wilson flanked Eleanor's other side, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. "The Harringtons have friends throughout academic circles," he warned. "Word travels fast in the antiquities world." The museum's interior felt different. Under the harsh beams of police flashlights, less a potential home and more a crime scene. Their footsteps echoed across the marble floor as they moved toward the basement archive stairs. Eleanor's heart pounded with each step downward, the temperature dropping as they descended into the space where she had made her discovery. 2 people in State Museum jackets stood at attention outside the archives, nodding respectfully as Dr. Chun approached. "Any disturbances?" Chun asked. "No, ma'am," the senior associate replied. "But we've had 3 calls from the National Antiquities Foundation in the last hour. Diana Harrington is claiming this falls under federal jurisdiction. Says we're interfering with international cultural agreements by securing the site." "This is my jurisdiction," Chen said firmly, "and potential evidence of academic fraud committed. Here falls under my purview until proven otherwise." Inside the archives, Eleanor showed them the vault, still open from her hasty departure. The leather portfolio with the Amenhotep VII documents remained in the floor safe where she had hidden it. "This is what I found," she explained carefully, removing the portfolio and placing it on a preservation table. "Professor Blackwell's personal records of the 1996 authentication dispute." Dr. Chun pulled on conservation gloves before opening the portfolio. As she examined the contents, her expression grew increasingly serious. "These are authentic university documents," she confirmed. "And if what they allege is true, we're looking at academic fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and possibly murder." David examined Professor Blackwell's letter. He specifically names Cedric Harrington and mentions a Dr. Jenkins who died in an accident while investigating. "We should look into Jenkins' death." "Already on it," Chun nodded. "I've requested the file from university archives, but we need to move these documents to secure storage immediately. The longer they remain here, the greater the risk." As they carefully repacked the evidence, a deputy rushed into the archives. "Dr. Chun, we've got a situation. 3 black SUVs just pulled up, federal plates. They're demanding immediate access to the site." Chun's expression hardened. Tell them this is an active investigation under state museum jurisdiction. No one enters without my authorization. They're claiming federal cultural heritage override, the deputy said. The lead agent has a document signed by the Secretary of State. Convenient timing, David muttered. Too convenient, Chun agreed. This goes higher than we thought. She turned to Eleanor. We need to get you and this evidence out of here now. There's a back exit through the maintenance tunnels. It comes out behind the old loading dock. I know it, Eleanor confirmed. That's how I escaped earlier. Perfect. Chun handed the leather portfolio to David. Deputy Wilson, escort Ms. Morgan and the evidence to my personal vehicle. It's parked behind the east wing. Take the tunnel and avoid being seen. Drive directly to the State Museum and secure this in the Conservation Lab. I've already alerted the board chair. He's waiting to witness the chain of custody. What about you? David asked. I'll handle our visitors, Chun said grimly. Buy you time to get clear. If these documents are what they appear to be, a lot of powerful people will go to extraordinary lengths to make them disappear. As Eleanor and David prepared to leave through the maintenance tunnel, Chun placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. What you've discovered could change Egyptian archaeology, Ms. Morgan. The truth about Amenhotep VII has been buried for too long. Eleanor nodded, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. I just wanted a place to start over. I never expected this. Sometimes we don't find our purpose, Chun replied. Sometimes it finds us. The maintenance tunnel was as dark and cramped as Eleanor remembered. She led the way, David following closely behind with the leather portfolio clutched to his chest. They moved silently, conscious of voices echoing from the main level of the museum. Deanna Harrington is up there, David whispered. I recognize her voice from museum fundraisers. She wants these files destroyed, Eleanor replied. They prove her father and grandfather suppressed the discovery of an unknown pharaoh. They faked authentication reports and falsified provenance documents. They reached the exit hatch, pushing it open carefully. The night air felt cool after the stuffiness of the tunnel. In the distance, they could see the flashing lights of government vehicles by the main entrance. Dr. Chun's car is just beyond those trees, David said. Stay low and follow me. Moving through shadows, they reached Chun's unmarked vehicle. David unlocked it and placed the leather portfolio in a hidden compartment beneath the rear seat. The State Museum is 20 minutes away, he explained, starting the engine. The board chair is a former prosecutor for the art crime team. He understands the significance of what we found. As they drove away from the museum, Eleanor glanced back at the property she had purchased just 5 days earlier. Police lights still flashed at the entrance, silhouetting figures engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion. Her simple hope for affordable housing had uncovered one of the most significant archaeological suppressions in recent history, evidence that had remained hidden for 25 years, protected by a museum director who had sacrificed his career to preserve the truth. Your life is going to change after tonight, David said quietly. Once these documents are properly secured and authenticated, everything changes. The Harringtons, their antiquities business, their academic connections, it all comes under scrutiny. Eleanor nodded, watching the Indiana landscape pass by. In darkness. Maybe that's what Professor Blackwell was counting on. Someone with nothing left to lose. Someone who would recognize the importance of what he left behind. The State Museum stood illuminated against the night sky. Its modernist architecture, a stark contrast to Westbrook's classical museum. Dr. Thomas Winters waited on the steps, his expression grave. Bring it inside quickly, he instructed as they approached. I've cleared the conservation lab of all personnel except my most trusted technician. Whatever you found, I want an unbroken chain of custody documented. In the laboratory, David carefully placed the leather portfolio on the examination table. This contains documentary evidence related to Amenhotep VII, evidence of academic fraud and conspiracy at the highest levels of the antiquities world. Dr. Winters, a former prosecutor himself, examined the documents with practiced efficiency. His expression darkened as he read Professor Blackwell's letter. "I knew Richard Blackwell," he said finally. "Worked with him in the 80s, one of the finest archaeological minds I ever encountered. If he preserved these records at great personal risk, he believed they were vital to historical integrity." The judge looked at Eleanor with new respect. "You purchased the museum 5 days ago, Ms. Morgan?" "Yes, sir. It was all I could afford after losing my home." "And now you've uncovered what may be evidence of one of the most significant archaeological cover-ups in decades. The Harringtons will fight to bury this again. That family has tremendous influence in the antiquities world." "What happens now?" Eleanor asked. "I'm declaring these materials evidence in a potential criminal investigation," Winters stated. "They'll be placed in the museum's secure storage tonight. Tomorrow, I'll contact the International Archaeological Association's Ethics Committee. This needs to be handled at the highest levels by people with no connections to the Harrington family." As they completed the necessary documentation to establish the chain of custody, Dr. Chun arrived looking battle-worn but satisfied. "Diana Harrington is furious," she reported. "But I stood my ground on jurisdiction. Diana Harrington is requesting a temporary restraining order against our investigation," she announced after ending the call. "Her attorneys are claiming these artifacts are protected by international agreements and must be immediately returned to the Egyptian government without further examination." "The Egyptian government doesn't even know they exist," Margaret protested. "That's the whole point. The Harringtons made sure of it. FBI agents are securing the scene," Chun continued. "But Victoria Harrington arrived with a team of attorneys before they could complete their initial assessment. They're claiming some materials are protected by academic confidentiality and cannot be examined without university approval." The implications were clear. The Harringtons were already constructing their narrative, attempting to use international regulations and academic protocols to regain control of evidence that could destroy their family legacy and the fortune built on suppressing an unknown pharaoh's existence. "I need to get to the State Museum," Chun said. "If they're filing for restraining orders, this goes even deeper than we thought." "Go," Dr. Winters agreed. "My team will continue here. We have more than enough to proceed, regardless of what happens with Diana Harrington's legal maneuvering." As Chun departed, Eleanor found herself drawn to a small metal container tucked behind the artifact storage, different from the others, more personal in nature. Inside were photographs of Professor Blackwell and his son Michael as young men, working at an excavation site, letters between the two, and a handwritten journal with entries spanning decades. The journal revealed the personal cost of the Blackwell secret investigation. Richard's wife had left him in 1997, unable to understand his obsession with the authentication dispute. Michael had been passed over for promotion repeatedly, his career stalling as he continued to quietly pursue the Amenhotep VII case against his department chair's orders. Both men had sacrificed everything: family, career advancement, personal happiness, to preserve evidence they believed would someday protect historical integrity. "They never gave up," Eleanor said softly, showing the journal to Margaret, "even when it cost them everything." "Some truths are worth any price," Margaret replied, her expression solemn. They understood that the evidence they were protecting wasn't just about exposing one authentication fraud. It was about revealing corruption at the heart of the antiquities world, about breaking the power of people who believed their profits mattered more than historical accuracy. By mid-afternoon, the State Museum's evidence recovery team had documented and secured the contents of the hidden collection. News of Diana Harrington's legal maneuvers had broken nationally, with conflicting reports about whether the courts would intervene in the investigation. Victoria Harrington had appeared briefly before cameras, expressing outrage at what she called academic persecution, and denying any family involvement in suppressing archaeological evidence. Eleanor watched the press conference on a tablet, noting the younger Harrington's practiced delivery and carefully constructed statements. This was a woman accustomed to controlling narratives, to being believed simply because of her position and family name. But the evidence from the museum told a different story, one of multi-generational fraud and brutal elimination of anyone who threatened to expose the truth. "She's good," Dr. Winters observed. "Sympathetic, dignified, appropriately indignant. If we didn't have the evidence, people would believe her. Just as they have for decades," Eleanor finished. "The power of position and reputation," Winters nodded. "It's why this case went unsolved for so long. Who would believe that America's most prominent antiquities dealer was erasing pharaohs from history, while simultaneously being celebrated for preserving cultural heritage?" Dr. Chun returned from the State Museum late that evening, her expression thunderous. The judge rejected Harrington's restraining order. The evidence was too compelling, too meticulously preserved by Blackwell. But Diana Harrington isn't giving up. She's appealing to the federal level, claiming national security implications because of international cultural agreements. The pattern was becoming clear. The Harringtons were attempting to use bureaucratic and legal means to delay the investigation, buying time to construct a defense and perhaps destroy any additional evidence that might exist elsewhere. As night approached, Eleanor found herself standing in what had once been the museum's main gallery, a quiet space now transformed by the bustling investigation. The large windows caught the setting sun, casting golden light across marble floors. Where visitors had once admired exhibits, including perhaps some who had known the truth about Amenhotep VII, but remained silent out of fear or complicity. David found her there, the young deputy's face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes bright with purpose. "Dr. Chun told me what you found in the hidden collection," he said. "All these years, Blackwell was keeping those artifacts right under everyone's noses. He preserved the truth when everyone else wanted it buried," Eleanor replied. "He and his son both sacrificed everything to ensure history would someday be protected from this kind of fraud." David nodded, settling onto a bench beside Eleanor. "I always wondered why Richard never reconciled with his family after his divorce. Why he became so isolated in his later years. Now I understand. He was carrying a burden too heavy to share. A burden that's finally being lifted," Eleanor said. "Because of what you helped me discover." "No, Ms. Morgan, because you came to Westbrook when you did. Because you had the courage to keep looking when others would have walked away. Richard always said the truth would find its moment. You were meant to be here to find what he left behind." The idea struck Eleanor with unexpected force that her path to Westbrook, seemingly driven by financial desperation and personal tragedy, might have had greater purpose. The foreclosure that had stripped away her former life had led her to this precise place at this precise moment in history, positioning her to uncover truth that had waited patiently for decades to be revealed. Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Chun, who entered the gallery with a tablet in hand. "The first authentication results are back from the evidence Blackwell preserved," she announced. "Modern technology applied to 25-year-old artifacts. It's remarkable what's possible now that wasn't when these items were suppressed." The results confirmed what the documentary evidence had suggested. Multiple ceramic analysis techniques, not available when the original authentication was performed, conclusively established the artifacts as belonging to a previously undocumented period within the 18th dynasty. Carbon dating of organic materials found with the artifacts placed them precisely in the time frame Blackwell had theorized for Amenhotep VII's brief reign. "This is definitive," Chun said, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal genuine emotion. "After 25 years, we can prove not only that these artifacts are authentic, but that they belong to a pharaoh deliberately removed from historical records. Not just Cedric Harrington's company, but 7 other prominent archaeologists whose names appear in Blackwell's records. Are any still active? Eleanor asked. 3, including Victoria Harrington's current department. Their authentication signatures appear on documents declaring these pieces historically insignificant, just days before the official dispute was reported. The implications were staggering. Not only could the original academic fraud be fully documented, but the subsequent cover-up, potentially involving the current generation of archaeological leadership, could be exposed and prosecuted. The carefully constructed Harrington legacy, built on suppressing historical discoveries and maintained through intimidation, was crumbling under the weight of evidence preserved by 2 men who had never stopped believing in the importance of protecting archaeological integrity. As night fell over Westbrook, the museum became the centerpiece of a media frenzy. News vans lined the access road, reporters broadcasting live updates about the Amenhotep VII files and the shocking connections to the prominent Harrington Antiquities empire. The small Indiana town that had harbored dark secrets for generations was now exposed in the harsh glare of international attention. Eleanor watched from a gallery window as the scene unfolded below. In just 1 week, her life had transformed completely. She had come to Westbrook as a grieving widow seeking affordable property, her future uncertain, her prospects limited by financial ruin. Now she stood at the center of what was rapidly becoming one of the most significant archaeological fraud investigations in recent history. Dr. Chun joined her at the window, her face illuminated by the flashing lights of news cameras below. The IAA director called personally. This investigation is now their top priority. We're bringing in additional resources, establishing a dedicated task force focused on antiquities fraud. Because of the Harrington connection? Eleanor asked. Partly, Chun nodded. But also because the evidence suggests this fraud may connect to similar historical suppressions in other regions. Blackwell's notes reference other dealers who created comparable cover-ups during the same time period. This could be bigger than just Westbrook. The possibility was both horrifying and compelling, that the systematic erasure of Amenhotep VII might have inspired similar acts elsewhere, or perhaps been inspired by them. That the corruption centered around Harrington Antiquities might extend beyond Egyptian artifacts, connecting powerful figures across the antiquities world in a network of profit and historical betrayal. What happens now? Eleanor asked. Authentication reports are being prepared for Victoria Harrington and executives at 3 other antiquities firms. The International Archaeological Association is personally reviewing the case to ensure everything is handled properly. There will be no mistakes, no technicalities that allow them to escape justice. Chun paused, studying Eleanor with newfound respect. None of this would have happened without you. Your decision to buy this museum, your curiosity about the vault, your courage in protecting the evidence when the Harringtons came for it. You've changed the course of archaeological history. Eleanor hadn't thought of it that way. She had been focused on survival, on finding affordable shelter after losing everything. The museum had been a desperate last resort, not a deliberate choice to uncover long-buried secrets. I was just trying to start over, she said quietly. To find a place where I could rebuild after losing Robert and our home. Sometimes our lowest moments lead us exactly where we need to be, Chun replied. Your financial hardship brought you to Westbrook at precisely the moment when those files needed to be found, after the museum's closure, but before the property could be acquired by the Harringtons. The observation resonated deeply with Eleanor. Throughout her life, she had sought control and stability through her teaching career, her marriage, her careful financial planning. The foreclosure that followed Robert's death had seemed like the ultimate failure, a complete loss of the security she had worked so hard to build. Yet that very loss had propelled her to Westbrook, to the city auction, to the abandoned museum. where evidence had waited patiently for decades to be discovered. Had her life proceeded according to plan, had Robert never gotten sick, had their finances remained stable, she would never have found herself in position to uncover the truth about Amenhotep VII. Professor Blackwell spent his life protecting these files, Eleanor reflected, sacrificing his own happiness to ensure that truth would someday come to light. He never knew if his efforts would matter in the end. That's the nature of faith, Margaret said, joining them at the window. Not religious faith necessarily, but faith in history. Faith that doing the right thing matters even when results aren't guaranteed. Richard and Michael believed that truth would eventually find its moment. And you were the moment it was waiting for. As the three stood watching the scene below, a convoy of official vehicles pulled up in front of the museum. Agents and EA representatives emerged, followed by officials from the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities. Among them was a composed woman in her early 40s, Catherine Jenkins, the daughter whose father had died investigating the original fraud. She asked to see the building, Chun explained, to stand in the place where the truth about her father's death was preserved all these years. Eleanor felt a profound connection to this woman who had lived her entire adult life under the shadow of unanswered questions. Without exchanging a word, she understood Catherine's need to see where Professor Blackwell had kept faith with her family, preserving evidence when official channels had failed. I'll meet her, Eleanor decided. She should know the whole story. Not just about the evidence, but about the men who protected it. About Richard and Michael Blackwell, who never forgot what happened to her father. As Eleanor descended the stairs to greet Catherine Jenkins, she felt a sense of purpose, unlike anything she had experienced before. The museum that had been her last resort, her desperate attempt at finding affordable property, had become something far more significant, a place of reckoning, of long-delayed justice, of truth finally emerging after decades in darkness. Eleanor Morgan had come to Westbrook seeking only shelter. She had found meaning instead. 3 months after the discovery in the Westbrook Historical Museum vault, Eleanor Morgan stood in the Grand Hall of the International Archaeological Association headquarters in London, watching as the Director General addressed a room packed with journalists, academic officials, and museum representatives from around the world. The investigation that had begun in a small Indiana museum had expanded into one of the most significant archaeological fraud cases in modern history. Sunlight streamed through the ornate windows, illuminating the faces of people who had traveled from across the globe to witness this historic moment. Today, we announce formal academic sanctions against Victoria Harrington and executives from 3 other major antiquities firms, the Director General declared, her voice steady and resolute. These sanctions cover the 1996 Amenhotep VII suppression, as well as conspiracy, falsification of provenance, and academic fraud charges spanning more than 2 decades. Eleanor felt Catherine Jenkins squeeze her hand as the formal announcement continued. Over the past months, they had formed a bond that transcended ordinary friendship, the finder of truth and the woman who had waited a lifetime to receive it, united by their shared commitment to historical integrity, long delayed. We also acknowledge that these sanctions would not have been possible without the extraordinary efforts of 2 men, Professor Richard Blackwell and Dr. Michael Blackwell, who preserved critical evidence at great personal cost when official channels failed. Their dedication to archaeological truth, and Ms. Eleanor Morgan's discovery of their carefully hidden files, has finally exposed a conspiracy that threatened the very foundation of Egyptian chronology. The press conference continued with technical details of the investigation, but Eleanor found her mind drifting to the remarkable journey of the past 3 months. What had begun with her desperate purchase of an abandoned museum had evolved into something far more profound, a reckoning with buried secrets, a challenge to entrenched power, and ultimately a restoration of integrity to historical records meant to preserve humanity's cultural heritage. The weeks following her discovery had been a whirlwind of activity as the international investigation expanded. The hidden evidence from the museum had revealed connections to other suppressed discoveries across multiple archaeological sites, all bearing similar authentication signatures, all somehow linked to dealers within the Harrington network of companies. The fraud had not been merely the theft or misidentification of artifacts. It had been a systematic erasure of historical evidence that challenged established chronologies, allowing private collectors to acquire pieces of immense historical significance. While the academic world remained unaware of their true importance, more disturbing still were the logs Eleanor had found hidden in Blackwell's collection, detailed accounts of researchers who had questioned these authentications before being silenced through career destruction, forced resignations, or in cases like Dr. Jenkins' suspicious accidents. For Eleanor personally, the aftermath had brought unexpected purpose. Her background in historical preservation and practical problem-solving had made her an invaluable consultant to the investigation, helping analysts understand the museum's cataloging system and how it had been compromised. What had begun as professional courtesy had evolved into a formal position with the newly created Authentication Oversight Division, applying her expertise to evaluating museum protocols worldwide. The museum itself had transformed as well. Rather than the burden she had initially feared, the property had become both her home and the centerpiece of her new life. With the investigation bringing international attention to Westbrook, grants and donations had poured in to restore the historic facility, not just as a working museum again, but as a training center for authentication specialists, a living memorial to the Blackwell's dedication and a testament to the power of truth. Preserved against overwhelming odds, Catherine Jenkins' voice pulled her back to the present moment. "They're asking for us." The Director General was inviting representatives of the affected academic families to join her at the podium, with Eleanor included as the discoverer of the evidence. As she moved forward through the crowd, Eleanor caught sight of her reflection in a polished marble column. A woman transformed from the desperate, grieving widow who had arrived in Westbrook just months earlier. Gone was the uncertainty that had clouded her features after Robert's death and the subsequent financial collapse. In its place was something new, purpose, resolve, and a quiet confidence born from having faced down one of the most powerful antiquities families in the world and emerged victorious. At the podium, Catherine spoke briefly but powerfully about living 25 years with unanswered questions about her father's death. Other representatives shared similar stories: careers destroyed, reputations ruined, lives lost in what had been painted as accidents but were now revealed as systematic elimination of anyone who threatened to expose the truth about suppressed archaeological discoveries. When Eleanor's turn came, she spoke not about herself, but about Richard and Michael Blackwell, two archaeologists who had sacrificed everything to preserve evidence they believed would someday matter. They never knew if their efforts would bear fruit, she said, her voice steady despite the bank of cameras before her. They simply did what was right day after day, year after year, protecting truth at great personal cost. Their faith in historical integrity sustained them when results seemed impossible. She paused, looking out at the assembled academic families and museum officials. In an age of instant gratification, their patience and perseverance stand as a powerful reminder that some truths take time to emerge. That justice, while sometimes delayed, need not be permanently denied if good people refuse to surrender to intimidation and power. After the formal proceedings concluded, Eleanor found herself surrounded by archaeologists, each wanting to share their stories and express gratitude for her role in bringing long-awaited answers. A retired Egyptologist gripped her hand with surprising strength, tears streaming down his weathered face. "My colleague was Dr. Abrams," he said, his voice thick with emotion. 30 years in the field, forced into retirement after questioning the Harrington authentication protocols. For 20 years, I've lived with his reputation tarnished by false accusations of methodological sloppiness. Now everyone knows the truth, that he was right all along. Stories like his were repeated throughout the afternoon. Careers destroyed, reputations ruined, and the helpless knowledge that antiquities dealers were protected by wealth and academic influence. The relief of vindication, of truth finally acknowledged, was palpable in every conversation. Dr. Chun found Eleanor as the crowd began to disperse. "The Director General wants to speak with you," she said, guiding Eleanor toward a private conference room about the next phase. The next phase had been the subject of intense discussion over recent weeks. The evidence from the museum had opened doors to investigations far beyond the original Amenhotep, the seventh suppression. Professor Blackwell's meticulous documentation had revealed patterns connecting fraudulent authentications across decades, suggesting a network of corruption that extended throughout the antiquities world. The IAA Director General, a straightforward woman with decades of field experience, got straight to the point. "Ms. Morgan, your work with our investigation team has been exemplary. Your practical experience with museum catalogs provides a perspective our authentication experts often lack. We'd like to formalize your position with a special appointment, focusing specifically on small regional museums worldwide." The offer was unexpected but compelling, a chance to apply her knowledge to protecting other collections from the kind of compromise that had been discovered at Westbrook. It wasn't the life Eleanor had planned before losing Robert, but it resonated with the person she had become through her experience at the museum. "I'd be honored," she replied, "but I want to maintain my residence in Westbrook. That museum deserves to be restored, not just for its historical significance, but for what it represents, the power of ordinary people to protect truth, even against overwhelming odds." The Director General nodded approvingly. "Actually, we were hoping you'd say that. We've envisioned the Westbrook facility becoming a regional training center for authentication protocols, a place where museum curators can learn from the mistakes of the past. Your restoration work on the structure could serve as the foundation for a new approach to provenance verification training." As Eleanor left the IA headquarters that evening, the setting sun cast long shadows across London's historic streets. Dr. Chun walked beside her, both quiet as they processed the day's events and their implications. "It's remarkable," Chun finally said. 3 months ago, you were a widowed teacher buying an abandoned museum because it was all you could afford. Now you're at the center of what will likely be remembered as one of the most significant archaeological fraud investigations in history." Eleanor smiled, thinking of the strange path that had led her to this moment. "Life rarely follows the plans we make," she said. "Sometimes our greatest setbacks lead us precisely where we need to be." "Professor Blackwell would be pleased," Chun observed. "Not just that the evidence was found, but that his museum will continue serving history's cause. That feels right somehow." That night, returning to her hotel room, Eleanor found news from Westbrook dominating international headlines. The sanctions against Victoria Harrington and her associates had forced the community to confront uncomfortable truths about its history and the powerful interests that had shaped it for generations. The museum, once an object of curiosity and sometimes derision, now stood as a symbol of integrity, long delayed but finally delivered. Someone had placed flowers on the museum steps back in Indiana, a simple tribute to the Blackwells who had preserved truth when others sought to bury it. Photos of the spontaneous memorial had gone viral, becoming a powerful symbol of vindication for those who had maintained faith in historical accuracy against overwhelming pressure. Margaret Wilson had sent a text message that brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. "Just heard the news on television. All those years working alongside Richard, I never knew what he was carrying, what he and Michael were protecting. You've given him back his voice." Returning to Westbrook the following week, Eleanor was surprised by the transformation that had already begun. With grants from historical preservation societies and support from the IA's new authentication initiative, the museum was being carefully restored to its original functionality while being adapted for its new purpose as both Eleanor's residence and a working center for authentication training. The main gallery, where Blackwell had hidden his collection behind a false wall, now served as a conference space where authentication experts could review historical materials. The conservation laboratory had been fully renovated and contained state-of-the-art equipment for examining questionable artifacts. Upstairs, Eleanor had created a comfortable home in the former curator's apartment, blending the building's historical character with modern comforts. The basement archives and vault, where her discovery had begun, were preserved exactly as she had found them, serving as a powerful reminder of how archaeological integrity had been protected when official channels failed. I never imagined this place could become something so meaningful, Margaret mused, settling into a chair in Eleanor's living room. When the museum closed and the building sat empty, I thought it would eventually be demolished. Another piece of Westbrook's history lost. Instead, it's become a place where history is preserved and examined, Eleanor said, where past authentication failures can finally be addressed. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Catherine Jenkins stood on the threshold, having flown back from London on the same flight as Eleanor. "Just wanted to say good night," she said, her quiet dignity a testament to years spent fighting for her father's vindication, "and to thank you again." In the 3 months since they'd met, Catherine had become not just a friend, but a partner. In the investigation, her legal background proving invaluable as the case expanded. Her decision to accept a position with the new Authentication Oversight Division meant she would be spending significant time in Westbrook as the training facility took shape. "Tomorrow's the big day," Eleanor reminded her. "The first group of museum curators arrives for training," Catherine nodded. 25 years after my father questioned those authentications, museum professionals will finally learn the truth about what happened. There's a symmetry to that I find deeply satisfying. After she departed, Margaret studied Eleanor with grandmotherly affection. "You found more than justice here," she observed. "You found a new path forward." Eleanor couldn't deny it. What had begun as a desperate purchase had evolved into something she could never have anticipated, not just a home, but a purpose that utilized her knowledge in service to historical integrity. Sometimes the worst moment of your life is just the beginning of something better, she said, thinking of the foreclosure notice that had initially seemed like the end of everything. The next morning, as sunrise illuminated the restored museum facade, Eleanor stood on the front steps, watching as a tour bus made its approach. The first contingent of museum professionals, 20 men and women selected for specialized training in authentication protocols, would be arriving momentarily. Catherine joined her, professional in a tailored suit, but with excitement evident in her eyes. "They're arriving at the exact same time my father first came to Westbrook," she noted, checking her watch. 7:42 a.m., another one of those symmetries. That makes this feel like completion of a circle. As the bus pulled up, Eleanor reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought her to this moment. The devastating loss of her husband, the financial ruin that followed, the foreclosure that had seemed like the ultimate failure. Each painful step had positioned her precisely where she needed to be to uncover truth that had waited decades to be revealed. Had any single element been different? Had she found another property? Had she ignored the vault? Had she lacked the courage to stand against the Harringtons? Justice might never have come for the academic personnel who had been silenced for questioning fraudulent authentications. Later that day, after welcoming the curators and giving them a tour of the facility, Eleanor retreated to what had once been the museum director's office, now her personal workspace. It contained a leather-bound journal that had belonged to Professor Blackwell. The precise handwriting filled pages with observations about the Amenhotep, the seventh suppression, and the authentications that followed, not just technical details, but his personal struggle with knowledge he could share with no one. One entry from 2003 stood out: another anniversary of Jenkins' death today. 7 years since that accident, and still no justice. The university has officially closed the case, though they use the term ongoing assessment to avoid admitting defeat. Only Michael and I know how thoroughly Harrington has compromised the system. Sometimes I wonder if our efforts will ever matter, if these files I've preserved will ever see the light of day. Faith without evidence is hard to maintain year after year. Eleanor felt a profound connection to the man who had written those words, a man who had persevered despite having no guarantee his actions would ever make a difference. Richard Blackwell had continued documenting falsifications, preserving evidence, protecting truth long after others had surrendered to the seeming inevitability of the Harringtons' power. His patient faith had finally been rewarded, though he hadn't lived to see it. The truth he and Michael had protected had emerged at last, bringing answers to families who had waited a lifetime for justice. The antiquities dealers who had believed themselves untouchable were facing consequences decades in the making. As afternoon light filtered through the newly restored windows, Eleanor prepared for the first training session with the museum professionals. The gallery, once a symbol of abandonment and decay, now bustled with purposeful activity as authentication experts, analysts, and preservation specialists collaborated to ensure the falsifications of the past would never be repeated. Catherine Jenkins had become a central figure in the program, her intimate knowledge of the case and legal expertise making her an invaluable resource. Now a senior advisor to the Authentication Oversight Division, she had dedicated herself to creating systems that would prevent antiquities dealers from ever again suppressing historical discoveries for profit. "I brought coffee," Catherine announced, arriving with a tray of cups from Westbrook's recently opened cafe, one of several new businesses that had appeared as the town experienced unexpected renewal. The international attention brought by the case had transformed Westbrook from a struggling rural community into a place of historical and strategic importance, drawing visitors, researchers, and museum personnel from across the country. "Perfect timing," Eleanor welcomed her. "The team from the British Museum is arriving this morning to help us integrate the training program with their new authentication protocols." As they settled into work, Eleanor marveled at how naturally she had adapted to this new role, applying her knowledge not to high school history lessons, but to ensuring the integrity of museum authentication systems. The skills she had developed throughout her life had found unexpected application, bringing meaning to experience that had seemed irrelevant after financial hardship forced the sale of her family's home. By mid-morning, the museum hummed with collaborative energy. In the main gallery, curators studied the historical fraud while developing new safeguards. In the conservation laboratory, technicians installed advanced authentication systems designed to prevent falsification. Throughout the facility, experts in various fields contributed specialized knowledge to an archaeological initiative designed to protect history's most vulnerable artifacts. A call from Dr. Chun brought momentous news. "Victoria Harrington has agreed to cooperate with investigators," she reported. Facing overwhelming evidence and abandoned by academic allies, she's begun providing information about other suppressed discoveries that we haven't yet uncovered. "How extensive is it?" Catherine asked, her voice tense with the implications. "She's implicated 9 other antiquities dealers," Chun replied, "including 4 currently working on major museum acquisitions. This is expanding beyond anything we anticipated." The revelation confirmed what Professor Blackwell had suspected decades earlier, that the corruption centered around the Harrington Antiquities empire extended far beyond Westbrook, connecting powerful dealers across the industry in a network of mutual protection and shared culpability. The suppression of Amenhotep VII had been merely the visible portion of a deeper system that had operated with impunity for generations. As Eleanor shared this update with the training team, she noticed something remarkable in the faces around. Her not just satisfaction at Harrington's cooperation, but a profound sense of vindication for the museum professionals, who had spent decades being told that questioning prominent dealers was career suicide. For the families who had lost loved ones to suspicious accidents when they raised concerns about authentication discrepancies. For everyone who had ever suspected the truth but lacked the evidence to prove it. This moment represented something beyond ordinary justice. It was restoration in its truest sense, not just of artifacts or provenance, but of faith itself. Faith in the possibility that no corruption, however entrenched, could permanently suppress what was true, if enough. People refused to surrender to intimidation and influence. That evening, as sunset painted Westbrook's landscape in golden light, Eleanor stood on the museum's newly restored steps, watching the community that had become her home. Children played in the recently renovated town park while residents patronized newly opened businesses. Shops that had been boarded up months earlier now displayed "Help Wanted" signs and fresh paint. The town was healing, not just from the recent revelations about authentication fraud, but from decades of economic decline that had slowly eroded its foundations. By confronting the truth about suppressed discoveries, Westbrook had begun reclaiming its identity from the powerful few who had controlled its narrative for generations. Margaret joined Eleanor on the steps, her weathered hands cradling a cup of tea. "Richard would be proud of what this place has become," she said, gazing at the facility that had been her workplace for nearly 3 decades. "Michael, too. They protected the truth when no one else would. And now look what's happened." "Because of their faith," Eleanor nodded, thinking of the men who had sacrificed so much without knowing if their efforts would ever matter. They understood something essential, that truth has value even when its victory isn't guaranteed. That preserving evidence of fraud is worthwhile even without certainty of justice. That integrity matters. A lesson for all of us, Margaret. Agreed, especially in times when power seems insurmountable. As darkness fell over Westbrook, lights illuminated the museum's facade from within, casting a beacon across the surrounding landscape. The facility that had once represented Eleanor's financial rock bottom had transformed into something she could never have imagined: a center for archaeological integrity, a monument to perseverance, and most unexpectedly, a true home. The bankruptcy that had seemed like the end of her life had instead been a beginning. The desperate purchase that had represented her last financial resort had become the foundation of profound purpose. The abandoned museum that had offered merely affordable property had revealed its true value in the vault where truth had waited patiently for decades to be discovered. Eleanor Morgan had come to Westbrook seeking only a roof over her head after losing everything. What she had found instead was immeasurably more valuable. Not just answers to long-buried authentication fraud, but a community restored, academic personnel vindicated, and a personal calling that transcended her former ambitions. Some buildings held more than their apparent purpose within their walls. Some held truths that could transform lives when finally revealed. For Eleanor, the journey that had begun in grief and financial ruin had led to an unexpected legacy, becoming the protector of a facility where archaeological integrity would be strengthened against the very vulnerabilities she had helped uncover. As stars appeared in the clear Indiana sky, Eleanor thought of Professor Blackwell's journal entry, questioning if his efforts would ever matter. If Richard could see the museum now, alive with purpose, filled with dedicated professionals committed to securing history's most vulnerable truths, a beacon of integrity for those who had waited generations for answers, he would know with certainty that his faith had not been in vain. Some discoveries change more than history. Some transform the discoverer, the community, and the very nature of what integrity means in a world where profit too often prevails over truth. The abandoned museum and its hidden vault had offered precisely such a discovery, a reminder that no truth, however deeply buried, is beyond reaching when the right person arrives at the right moment to uncover what others have fought to conceal. The humble building that had once been Eleanor's last resort now stood as a testament to the power of perseverance, to the possibility that our greatest losses might lead us to our most meaningful purpose, and to the enduring value of protecting truth, not just for ourselves, but for all who come after. For in the end, Eleanor had discovered something far more precious than an unknown pharaoh's treasure map. She had found that even in our darkest moments, when all seems lost, we may be standing on the threshold of our greatest contribution, if we have the courage to turn the key, open the vault, and bring long-buried truth into the light. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload. From us